Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. Once again, I am your host, Hector Kolonas, and today I am joined by a fantastic husband and wife team, Emiliano and Shannon Lerda. How are you both doing?
Very good. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Hector.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining me. Now, you folks are running a pretty interesting type of shared space. So instead of me introducing what Elevator is, I'm going to hand it over to the best couple in town to tell me what is Elevator and who does it serve?
Our company is here to elevate small businesses and communities. And we do that by providing flexible space that's specifically designed for small businesses with physical goods. So think about those that are in e-commerce, they're buying and selling products online, or makers, people that may have too many boxes in their lives. We are the perfect fit for them. And the experience feels a lot like co-working, but it is made for people that have physical goods. What that means is we have a dock. We have assistance with shipping and receiving. So we provide some limited logistical support, and our spaces are made for that purpose. And so people may use our spaces for offices / maybe having some inventory, maybe assembling some of their products. So we do that and we use it as a way to build not only businesses and help them network with each other, but also to help the community that is adjacent and we're part of a bigger community in every city that we're in. Right now, we are in Omaha and in Des Moines, and we are getting ready to open our newest location in Kansas City. And there are two other additional locations that are coming online later this year.
So tell me a little bit more about the whole co-warehousing and all the extra services and things you do. But before we get to that, what brought you to this kind of shared workspace business? Because obviously you didn't wake up one day as kids and be like, I want to start a co-working space, or I want to do a logistics company. What did you do before this, and how did you get into kind of the co-warehousing game?
Yeah, it came about actually very organically, which is always the best way to get into a new endeavor. Emiliano's background is he's an attorney. He worked in nonprofit and then real estate development. And my background is in finance and commercial real estate, and then entrepreneurship. So it was really just a great mesh of all that we were doing brought together for co-warehousing. But we got into it because we had an e-commerce company. Would have been in 2018 to 2021. We were running a pet supplies shipping and selling on Amazon, and we were doing all of this work from our home. It's a great place to start, but it's a very painful place to try to scale. We had issues with inventory, boxes, taking over our spare bedroom, basement, garage. And the last straw, and where we knew we needed to make some changes, was when it took over our living room. And we have some pictures to prove it. Emiliano had the foresight to snap pictures when we were doing stressful packing and labeling operation. But it was just this we needed space, and traditional warehouse leases were too large, too long-term of a commitment on a fixed amount of square feet, just really isolating because you don't want to go to a warehouse 5 days a week to be there all day by yourself or with two other staff people. So it was just this need for community, but also the actual need for the warehousing space, and just nothing on the market fit it. And so after a long search, Emiliano and I were talking about why we couldn't find the right space for our business. And I said to him, I really love co-working. It's so cool. There's vibrant businesses doing innovative things alongside of each other, but it's not a good fit for boxes and pallets and shipping and receiving. They would hate that. And so somebody needs to do co-warehousing. Somebody should do that. And Emiliano is always the visionary. He's like, tell me more about co-warehousing. What is that? And after hearing about what co-warehousing is in my mind, he's like, I think we should do that.
I have to say that it was absolutely Shannon's idea, but it was so funny because I had been working for a family office that does real estate investments and development. And as part of my role, I had been reviewing and studying business models for co-working because one of the districts that they're building and developing, it's an innovation district. And so it really called for a co-working component. So when Shannon said co-warehousing, I was immediately, having looked at the models, I knew there were a couple of key cost drivers that would be different in a more industrial model of co-working, which is co-warehousing. And so that is when we started developing the idea more with a spreadsheet and looking at numbers, doing some market research, and then also, of course, socializing the idea with friends. And then it started to get more serious as time progressed.
It's such a fantastic way to get into co-working, to have that pain, to feel the frustration, to look for that community, and then to be like, well, why don't we do it? And I love the fact that is the foundation on which you two built this. But I also picked up, Emiliano, when you were talking earlier in the previous question about the frustration of those boxes. I was like, yeah, this was a trigger point for both of you to kind of have those boxes in your lives and be like, there has to be a better way. And that's obviously the entrepreneurial journey. So great to see like that is where you started. Now you looked at the numbers, you looked at how the differences between co-working spaces traditionally and co-warehousing. In your opinion, what is the major differences when it comes to like this spreadsheet side of things? Like what are the different costs that are different from, let's say, just a traditional co-working space?
Yeah, I would say there are two major cost drivers that are very different. And then there's a third component that I think is also a big differentiator. So the first two cost components are, number one, rent. I mean, when you're looking at an office rent market, whatever market is in your local community, it's always going to be more expensive per square foot than flex space or industrial leaning flex space with the finishes and what you would expect an industrial leaning flex space to be like. So rent is one. And then, of course, that goes hand in hand with the finishes, the levels of finishes, right? Like the cost per square foot of tenant improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Huge difference. And I mean, I think that if you go to an office space, your expectations are such that you do expect high level finishes. And so intrinsically that becomes, it just makes the model more expensive. It's higher risk, high level of investment that is needed, a cash outlay, whether it's the landlord or the operator. So I think that those are two major drivers on the Excel sheet, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I really liked, and at that moment we were talking about a lot because this conversation happened in early 2021. We liked the fact that it's a model that also is sticky, meaning, we went through this pain point as well. We use a 3PL for a period of time, trying to get the boxes out of our house, and then tried to change that because we had several significant problems and challenges with the 3PL service provider that we were working with. So we wanted to then bring it back into our control, the shipping and receiving. And those changes, they take time. They're complicated. They're costly. And so that was also another attractive feature that post-COVID in 2021 seemed to be a lot more.
It does make a lot of sense. And for the folks who are listening from like the co-working or traditional CRE world, what is 3PL?
Third-party logistics. Yeah, so a lot of people that do shipping and receiving and then may have to process inventory, buying from wholesalers and then sending them to maybe fulfillment centers. People that do that transaction, sometimes they outsource that, the receiving of the large shipments from the wholesalers to repackage them and then send them to the distribution centers based on
Got it.
the instructions, whether it's Amazon or another company. And so oftentimes people just outsource it. So instead of you receive it at home or you place a business, you send it directly to another warehouse that you don't go to. With a 3PL between us, co-warehousing and a 3PL, is that the third-party logistics service providers you don't go there. You don't work there. You don't, there's not a community or a social component. It's a purely transactional. You send the shipment, they process it, and then they send it to but in doing so, you also are losing a little bit of control. And if you're not a big player, you can't really exercise a lot of influence over the entire process.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm guessing this is something that you kind of offer. Do you have like logistics support? Let's kind of dig a little bit more into what are the products that you currently offer, right? In co-working, it's hot desks, private desks, offices, meeting rooms. Do you offer those plus something else, or do you not offer any of the kind of co-working traditional products?
So we do have some co-working, but the vast majority of our, revenue comes from the month-to-month warehouse suites that people rent. We have in addition to warehouse suites, we have some office suites because there are service providers who want to co-locate with small businesses. And then in addition to that, we have some co-working. We don't do hot desks and we don't have traditional co-working desk setups, but we do offer co-working memberships. So people will come in and just find a chair, and get some work done and use the Wi-Fi and maybe have a meeting up in our kitchen and break room, coffee and snacks. We have conference rooms and meeting space for not just the office users, but also the warehouse users. We provide, and then as far as the shipping and receiving, and it's all included in our 1 monthly, rate, but we receive shipments on behalf of our members. So we have a couple of, for example, interior designers who are often out in the field working with their clients, not here, not able to receive their furniture that's coming in pallets. So we receive shipments Monday through Friday on behalf of members. They don't need to be here or be present. Make sure that their shipments are received and secure. And then we also oversee the daily carrier pickups. So UPS, USPS, and FedEx come every day, and we make sure that they come, that the shipments get picked up, and that you don't have to wait around for UPS, which was one of those pain points that we had when we were at home trying to schedule UPS pickups. They would maybe come in a 4-hour window and you had to just and wait either. So that, I say, is that it makes up our revenue streams.
Interesting. And so tell me a little bit more about, obviously, when you're talking about storing some fairly large things, right? Am I paying you by the square footage for warehouse space? Is it kind of like the self-storage model, or does it fluctuate based on how many things I have? How does the model work with regards to the warehousing side?
So every warehouse suite is private, and you choose the size of your suite that you want based on what you think your need will be. And then we allow you to size up or size down and move to a different warehouse suite. So it's not open. Everybody's got their privacy and their own secured space. Do allow a great deal of flexibility. And the warehouse suites range in size from about 80 to 100 square feet up to about 1,500 square feet. So there's a wide range of sizes, but they're yet all smaller than what you could find out in the commercial real estate market, traditionally. We also, have people who will take, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 7 or 8 warehouses, like individual suites. And then they can gradually grow as business demands. And then once they hit a certain point, they're like, okay, we're ready now for a year lease. And so we just filling a gap, I would say, and helping businesses in one part of their journey.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating approach because, I'm fascinated both by kind of co-working and kind of where we all work. And I'm also just fascinated by this whole world of self-storage. There are two models that increasingly, and especially if you add this middle piece where you're handling the picking up and dropping off and that piece, it's just like the perfect mend between kind of the industrial shared space and the workspace shared space. But I'm guessing there's a lot more that goes into picking a location, right? You said you've got another 3 in kind of the works, one opening fairly soon in Kansas City. Whereas a co-working space is normally like, oh, we need high footfall. We need it to be around parking. We need it to be, near places people can go and eat lunch. Your choices are slightly different, right? You need to be able to receive large packages. You need to make sure that there's ample storage and kind of container space, I guess. Like, did you go that high, or is it like, am I overthinking it?
Yeah, we don't do containers, but yes, like full size semis. We receive shipments from full size semis, and so we have to have a dock. And that's by the way, that's another perk is if you don't have a dock and if you're receiving a shipment at your house or your office that doesn't have a dock, oftentimes they will charge you a lift gate fee. And that the cost can vary, but it can be into $100, $200, $300 depending on the service provider. But yeah. So we do have to have a dock when we look for a building, but we're very adaptive. That's another aspect of our model that I think it allows us to repurpose some buildings that may not be perfect for the typical industrial user. So we don't really need a terribly high ceiling clearance because our users are smaller. They don't really, the ceiling clearance is not an issue. And so we can look at buildings, so long as they have a dock or we have the ability to put a dock, then we would consider a building. In Omaha, we have a multi-story building, so it has to have a freight elevator. In Des Moines, it's a multi-story building, and it has one elevator that serves both as passenger and also freight elevator. And so you have to consider those things. The units we separate them with drywall and metal doors. So the doors have to be wide enough for you to be, and the corridors have to be wide enough for you to be able to use a pallet jack. We don't use forklifts, so that also, like, you start separating there.
Yeah.
If you need containers, we probably are not the right solution for you. We don't use forklifts and stuff like that. I thought it would be fun, but then we thought about the liability.
Yes.
So we provide those services, and they're in a way they're very limited in that we don't do fulfillment for members. Of course, it's tempting to offer those type of services.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we stay focused on what the most critical component of our business, and that is offering the right space with flexibility, but with so much emphasis on the community building aspect of our business. So, I mean, that has to be the centerpiece. And I think that, I know enough about co-working to know that that's also critical for co-working operators.
Absolutely.
So in a similar way, for us to be able to connect with local resources, bring local resources to program the building so that there are opportunities for people to meet with each other, and then collaborate with each other, but also bringing people from outside that can provide access to capital, consulting and support in terms of accounting, marketing, IT, you name it, HR. A lot of these small businesses have some of those very similar challenges. So what we have found is that around the small businesses, you start seeing the service providers, an attorney that is renting one of our units and has already 18 clients from our 100 plus businesses that are building in Omaha. So you start to see that kind of organic community building that happens. You curate things, but then you don't control it. In fact, you shouldn't control it. And so the rest, it just starts to happen organically.
That it's so similar in like the community side of the co-working element, or that shared space and that shared place. What you said also reminded me of two other trends that we're seeing. The one is around this idea where more and more operators are offering, or co-working spaces are offering virtual mail. Now, it's very, very tempting to be like, oh, well, we've got all this space. Why don't we become a virtual mail center? And then I want to ask you a little bit about that. But then there's also this other trend where operators are looking for more and more revenue per member. And it becomes very, very tempting to be like, well, why don't we bulk buy the shipping rates, right? And then you take a margin on that. Or why don't you provide this additional service of logistics support or coordinating or marketing? Why don't you bring that in-house and sell it to your members? So I'm going to ask you about both of those in one question. There's a lot of things you could do to make more revenue per your members. What are you thinking about and what are you avoiding?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of shiny objects, and I think there's a lot of potential. But we have one location that is open and stabilized, and our second location has been open for 4 weeks. I think it's still a little early to implement additional services with enough members to utilize those services to make the effort of developing something for such a small audience. So I think what we're focusing on is getting to 5 locations and then seeing what is it that the members want and how many of them want it. When we opened Omaha in 2022, we thought it was going to be all Amazon and e-commerce, 100%, with a lot of shipping and a lot of receiving. And it's actually been a lot smaller volume than we thought. So a lot of the members are service-based, or they don't do a lot of shipping. Maybe they're candle makers and they go to the farmers markets. They might be, we have an electronics recycling company. There's a lady who makes dog treats and, has and sells those at markets. So the ingoing and outgoing shipments is lighter than we thought. At this point, I think it's, we're still waiting and seeing what do our members really want, and we'll focus on what adds the most value to the most members.
Back to your earlier question about how do we choose a location, we have found that if you choose a building that is in a part of town that people like to go to, that's very important, near amenities. So we do want to be near amenities. And then also we do want to be, in a way, part of an exciting part of town. Now, we can't be in the prime location because we're not going to pay that. But if we're adjacent to, or part of a location that is turning around. So what we have found that the community around you, then they rally and they get excited for what you bring to the ecosystem. So we love collaborating with other co-working operators. We love collaborating with chambers of commerces and other economic development entities that are locally all vying and trying to not only bring this type of amenities to the local ecosystems of small businesses, but they're also trying to revive a specific area of town. And then you're part of a bigger group of people that are trying to turn some area around. So that actually has gotten a lot of traction.
There is so much that can be said about the hyperlocal economic impact of shared spaces. And it's not only, how much people spend from inside your space, around your space, but how much are you reinvigorating the area around, right? How much of those businesses are getting involved with what you're doing? How much are you collaborating? And you've definitely hit all those points on the head. So I commend you for that. And I love the fact that that's part of your model. On the topic of your model, are you renting these spaces on long-term leases and kind of doing the arbitrage model? Are you partnering up with a landlord? Are you partnering up with people who have derelict or abandoned spaces? What is the model that you're currently following for expansion?
So we are in our first location, we're leasing the building, but the building itself was actually acquired and is owned by 2 of our investors who acquired it in order to help us get started with the first location. As we grow, the operating company is still continuing to lease the locations, but we've developed a model where we can circle up a group of investors who are interested in commercial real estate acquisition and development in that specific asset class, and then acquire the buildings, renovate the buildings with a different entity. And then, so in a way, it is a partnership because there's some kind of ownership between the 2 entities, but it is still, officially a lease structure. Conversations about management agreements with other landlords where we've looked in markets where we haven't found the right building to acquire, but we found some very interesting properties that we would like to lease or partner with an owner. And we haven't had a lot of traction yet with those, but we're still a very young company. With our first location just opening in 2022, I think that, we need to get a little more time and seasoning maybe under our belt. And also, people and landlords don't necessarily understand what co-warehousing is.
Yeah.
And, a lot of them are on the sidelines waiting to see, how successful it is. Does it have staying power? Which we obviously feel that it does, but a little more time, I think, will help with that.
Absolutely. And if they ask in the future, just send them this episode, and then they can get all caught up. But it's really interesting because I want to go back to what you're saying, and this is a model that we're seeing very, very prominently become more mainstream in co-working, and that's the kind of the propco opco model, right? The property company owns and buys the building, and the opco runs the business, and they're two separate entities that just happen to do all these deals together. So really glad to kind of see that that is your model and that you have got some backing to keep growing. But on the topic of management agreement, co-working has been around since maybe 2009. Management agreements only last year became more popularized with kind of some of the largest landlords being like, okay, this is something we should look at. So co-warehousing is going to come up pretty quickly on that tail, but it's a different type of investor, right? Someone who buys an office building has one type of mentality. Someone who buys a industrial is expecting that kind of Amazon client or that. So it's going to take a bit of time, but I can totally see them getting on board, especially as you keep executing and as you keep showing those numbers, that it's going to become a no-brainer for them. So really, really excited about that. I wanted to ask you one more geeky question before I get out of your way and let you get back to the awesome work that you're both doing. I know it's not exactly a co-working business. So have you found that co-working technology has helped or hindered you in being able to roll this out from like an operations perspective?
Yeah, so we have used and just adapted to co-working space management platforms. I think that they work for our model as well. And while they may have not exactly what we need and no software is perfect, it's been very helpful. We've used Office R&D for the space management platform. We use HubSpot every day for our sales and customer acquisition management. So it's been, I would say, the co-working options that are out there are adaptable for our model.
I'm glad to hear that you are seeing getting the benefits, not only from like the understanding and the model, but also some of the technologies helping you just scale faster, right? Where that way we all get to kind of make the pie bigger for everyone. And so I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you both so much for joining me. Thank you for sharing so much about how you work, your thinking, your mentality, your models. And I cannot wait to share more of your news. Congratulations again on the new location. And we look forward to celebrating even more new locations as you continue to grow.